The ancient astrologers believed every zodiac sign carried a hidden curse disguised as personality. They documented bizarre behaviors so specific, so unnervingly accurate, that modern psychology still can't fully explain them. What they found wasn't just quirky, it was disturbing. And if you recognize yourself in what comes next, you'll understand why the ancients feared certain signs more than others. Aries wasn't just associated with war. Ancient texts claimed Aries natives were born with what they called the mark of first blood, a spiritual imprint that made them incapable of finishing anything they didn't start with violence or passion. Medieval astrologers noted that Aries would rather destroy their own creation than let someone else claim it. They documented cases of Aries artisans burning their workshops, warriors sabotaging their own armies, lovers destroying relationships the moment peace arrived. The quirk wasn't aggression, it was the inability to exist without conflict. The ancient interpretation was chilling. Aries doesn't seek battle, Aries needs it to feel alive. Without an enemy, they become their own. Taurus was called the guardian of matter, but the ancient texts reveal something darker. Babylonian astrologers noticed that Taurus natives developed what they termed the hunger that never satisfies, an endless need to possess, to hold, to keep. But here's the bizarre part. They didn't want to use what they collected. They just needed to know it couldn't be taken. Ancient records describe Taurus individuals hoarding food they'd never eat, relationships they'd never nurture, money they'd never spend. The quirk was pathological stillness. Taurus wasn't stubborn because they believed they were right. They were frozen because change felt like death. The Greeks wrote that Taurus would rather starve than adapt, rather die than transform. It wasn't strength, it was terror of the unknown disguised as stability. Gemini carried the mark the ancients feared most, the twin soul. Mesopotamian astrologers believed Gemini was born with two consciousness streams fighting for control of one body. They documented bizarre behavior patterns. Gemini natives who would start conversations they couldn't remember, make promises their other self would break, live double lives without awareness. The quirk wasn't being two-faced. It was genuine fragmentation. Ancient texts claimed Gemini experiences time differently, living in multiple mental realities simultaneously. Roman astrologers noted that Gemini rarely finished their own sentences because their mind was already 3 conversations ahead. They called it the curse of the eternal observer, present everywhere, committed nowhere, belonging to nothing because they were always becoming something else. Cancer wasn't just emotional in ancient astrology. They were considered dangerous. Egyptian star readers documented what they called the backward walker, Cancer's bizarre inability to move forward without carrying everything from the past. The quirk was memory weaponization. Cancer didn't just remember wounds, they fed on them, nurtured them, kept them alive like pets. Ancient astrologers noted that Cancer natives would recreate childhood traumas in adult relationships, not because they wanted to heal, but because the familiar pain felt safer than unknown happiness. Byzantine texts describe Cancer as the sign that loves its cage, building emotional prisons, and then claiming to be trapped. The most disturbing observation: Cancer would rather suffer with meaning than thrive without purpose. Leo's ancient quirk wasn't arrogance. It was emptiness masked as grandeur. Persian astrologers identified what they call the hollow crown, Leo's desperate need for constant validation because internally they believed they were nothing. Medieval texts document bizarre Leo behavior, giving everything to strangers to prove generosity, destroying their own achievements if praise didn't follow, performing kindness only when witnessed. The quirk was performative existence. Ancient astrologers noted that Leo couldn't feel their own worth, only the reflection of it in others' eyes. They wrote that Leo feared silence more than death because silence revealed the void inside. Roman records describe Leo natives who would rather be hated spectacularly than forgotten quietly. The ancient verdict was brutal. Leo doesn't seek the spotlight to shine, but to avoid disappearing into their own darkness. Virgo carried what Babylonian astrologers called the curse of the unfinished, a bizarre compulsion to see flaws that didn't exist and fix problems that weren't broken. Ancient texts document Virgo natives who would rebuild perfect structures, rewrite flawless documents, restart healthy relationships, searching for invisible errors. The quirk wasn't perfectionism, it was the inability to accept completion. Greek astrologers noted that Virgo experienced peace as threat. If nothing needed fixing, Virgo had no purpose. They documented cases of Virgo individuals creating chaos in their own lives just to have something to organize. The ancient interpretation was tragic. Virgo doesn't pursue perfection to achieve it, but to ensure they never do, because achievement would mean confronting their own worthiness without conditions. Libra's ancient quirk was paralysis disguised as diplomacy. Egyptian star readers documented what they called the frozen scale, Libra's bizarre inability to make decisions not because they saw all sides, but because they feared any choice would reveal who they truly were. Medieval astrologers noted that Libra would ask everyone's opinion on matters that affected only them, not seeking wisdom but permission to exist. The quirk was identity outsourcing. Ancient texts describe Libra natives who became whoever they needed to be for whoever was watching, not from manipulation, but from genuine uncertainty about their own core. Persian records claim Libra feared being alone because solitude forced them to choose a self, and choosing meant eliminating possibilities. The ancient warning was clear: Libra doesn't seek balance, Libra hides in it. Scorpio wasn't associated with mystery by accident. Ancient astrologers documented what they called the Watcher's Curse, Scorpio's bizarre compulsion to know everything about everyone while revealing nothing about themselves. But here's what made it strange: they didn't use the information, they just needed to possess it. Babylonian texts describe Scorpio natives who collected secrets like artifacts, studied people like specimens, understood betrayal before it happened because they had already imagined every possible version. The quirk was preemptive destruction. Scorpio didn't trust because Scorpio had already run every scenario where trust failed. Ancient astrologers noted that Scorpio would rather end something beautiful than watch it decay naturally. They called it the mercy of the blade, killing what they loved before time could. Sagittarius carried what the Greeks called the archer's blindness, a bizarre inability to see anything directly in front of them because they were always aiming at distant horizons. Ancient texts document Sagittarius natives who would abandon stable lives for vague philosophies, leave loving relationships for abstract ideals, sacrifice present joy for future possibilities that never arrived. The quirk wasn't wanderlust, it was escape addiction. Medieval astrologers noted that Sagittarius couldn't stay still not because the world called them, but because stillness forced them to confront themselves. They documented cases where Sagittarius would create problems just to have an excuse to leave. The ancient interpretation was harsh. Sagittarius doesn't seek truth. They run from it using philosophy as permission to never commit. Capricorn's ancient quirk was the most misunderstood. Babylonian astrologers called it the mountain's loneliness. Capricorn's bizarre belief that achievement requires isolation, that success demands sacrifice of everything warm. Ancient texts describe Capricorn natives who would systematically remove every person who made them feel human, believing emotions were obstacles to greatness. The quirk was purposeful coldness, but here's what the ancients noticed: Capricorn wasn't naturally cold, they taught themselves to be. Greek astrologers documented that young Capricorn was often the most tender sign until they learned that tenderness was punished and hardness rewarded. The ancient tragedy was this: Capricorn doesn't climb because they love the summit, they climb to justify the loneliness they believe they deserve. Aquarius carried what Persian astrologers called the humanitarian's paradox, bizarre devotion to humanity paired with complete disconnection from individual humans. Ancient texts document Aquarius natives who would champion causes for people they'd never met while ignoring suffering of those beside them. The quirk was abstract empathy. Medieval astrologers noted that Aquarius felt deeply for concepts, but remained strangely numb to persons. They documented cases where Aquarius would sacrifice personal relationships for ideological consistency, believing principles mattered more than people. The ancient observation was cutting. Aquarius doesn't love humanity. They love the idea of loving humanity, which requires no actual intimacy or personal cost. Pisces was the sign ancient astrologers wrote about with equal parts fascination and concern. They called it the dreamer's drowning. Pisces' bizarre inability to distinguish between what they felt and what was real. Egyptian texts describe Pisces natives who lived in emotional realities that existed nowhere but inside them, who believed in versions of people that never were, who mourned futures that never could be. The quirk was voluntary delusion, but the ancient texts suggest something stranger. Pisces knew. They knew their dreams weren't real, their intuitions weren't always true, their emotions distorted reality. They just preferred beautiful lies to ugly truths. The ancient verdict was both sympathetic and stern. Pisces doesn't escape reality because they're weak, but because they're strong enough to create better worlds inside their minds, which makes actual life unbearable by comparison. The ancient astrologers didn't see these quirks as flaws to fix, but as signatures to recognize. They believed every sign carried both gift and curse in the same trait, that your greatest strength and deepest wound lived in the same place. Which means your zodiac sign doesn't predict who you'll become, it reveals what you've been avoiding becoming. And maybe that's why the ancient texts still feel uncomfortably accurate, because they weren't describing stars, they were describing what humans do when they're too afraid to see themselves clearly.